Thank you for joining. I value all of your time, and hopefully this is helpful for you, whether you're new to Notion or more of an avid Notion user and trying to work on project management as a meta skill. This was a topic that came up quite a bit in conversations with manifest users and seemed to be the most common topic of people just either for work or for personal projects or a little bit of both, really just trying to get a handle on how to manage projects and how to make sure that projects are aligning with larger goals. So that's what today's quick session and exercise is going to be focused on. So, we'll also have a little mini exercise template in Notion that I'll share with you all. And hopefully that can kind of provide some space for reflection as well. Just a quick introduction. My name is David DeCespedes. I'm a teacher. I work with teachers and students in technology and also onboarding onto platforms like Notion. And I've also been, over the past 3 months or so, really kind of transitioning into creating templates and really focusing more on minimalist productivity and how that could really counter a lot of the stresses and sense of overwhelm with managing our projects and kind of efforts. So this kind of started with a template that I just kind of posted to Reddit a couple months ago and turned into more of a formal project. So, and these webinars are also just super helpful to get a sense of where we are thinking and where it makes sense to focus in terms of templates that really have an impact on our productivity and our just lifestyle. And quick note on manifest productivity. This website I just launched earlier this week, and it's essentially meant to be a place to store resources, not just templates that I'm making or videos that I'm creating, but trying to kind of zoom out a little bit into the topic of minimalist productivity and bringing in other resources, whether they're articles, books, other YouTube videos, and really focusing the attention on minimalist productivity as a strategy for aligning our work with our values and doing it in a way that's not about producing more, but about really focusing our energy on the things that matter. So very excited about that, but I just wanted to share that with you all as well. And just a quick note, if there's any comments or questions at any point through the session, definitely feel free to use the chat with questions or comments, because I do want to make sure that we have time to go over those and to make sure that we address any any open ideas that come from you all. So hope to be of service there. And these are just two versions of the manifest system that I mentioned earlier that are on Gumroad, and really just meant to be a starting point for a combination of implementing strategies like habit tracking, project management, and setting of a larger vision and annual goals, and more specific quarterly objectives. So this was evolution a year plus in the making for my personal use, that I then kind of converted into a system that could hopefully be useful for more people as well. And for the early adopters that have the beta version, it's a lot of similar, but the second version, I also included and prepared a set of videos. I think it was like 15 short videos to walk through each step of that system. So goals for today, things that I want to hopefully have you all leave with at the end of the session. First, defining what projects are and what tasks are, and just kind of aligning on what those terms mean. We're going to do a quick exercise on how to build just kind of a first 1.0 database of our active projects, identifying the details about those projects that we want to track. And this is a first step. So this is obviously a work in progress for all of us, myself included. And last and most importantly, looking at the steps of planning, making, and reflecting on projects as a continual process of refinement, of understanding what elements of projects are most important to you, so that when you're reflecting, you are getting those takeaways and having those feed into future projects. Project management is, in my view, one of the top meta skills that kind of reverberate across not just our work lives, but personal as well. And these three steps seem to be the most impactful in terms of building up as a habit. And this also comes from the reality of having a lot of projects that we're juggling and managing simultaneously. And this was part of the reason why I personally got into productivity and really trying to understand theories and mental models at a deeper level in terms of how I could apply some of these strategies personally. And just kind of for context, married, have a 2-year-old. I work at a school essentially full-time, work on Notion templates, and I'm starting to focus more on content and the manifest productivity community. And although it can get at times a little unruly, I do feel like the systems in place that took quite a while to kind of become second nature have allowed for me personally to take on these projects without feeling like every waking moment is about work, and still making sure that there's energy focused toward family, personal hobbies, reading, in addition to anything work related. So that's really the basis for Manifest, and just speaking with other Notion users and really being active in the Notion community. There's a lot of common themes that were sort of interesting to see in terms of a lot of people being in the same boat and really just looking for tools and mindsets and strategies to really put into action and get a handle on all of these things with a little bit more focus. And this quote in particular, I think, sums up a lot of how we can use technology, whether it's Notion or other tools. Notion is definitely not the end all be all of digital tools, even though I think it's an extremely powerful platform. But looking at technology as essentially an extension of our mind, we've heard terms like second brain, perhaps. I like digital memory as a place to store information, store knowledge, and have systems in place that we could quickly refer back to. And the information that we're looking for is exactly where we need it, when we need it. So probably the most powerful facet of Notion, in my opinion, is being able to customize your workspace to the extent that it's reflecting how you work personally and the things that you want to track, instead of pushing a very specific format or specific properties that you maybe are not as interested in tracking or reflecting on. And just to get into defining these two terms, what do they mean, and what are we using as starting points for this session and project management in general? And this is from I believe David Allen's Getting Things Done book, but we essentially look at projects as anything less than a year in terms of time frame, and also anything that requires multiple tasks to achieve a specific outcome. So, if we are going to get groceries, that's maybe not necessarily a project, it's more of a task. But if we're, say, launching an online course, that would be broken up into probably several tasks with, a target timeline as well. And then in terms of tasks or actions, we're kind of using these terms interchangeably. But the most powerful aspect of tracking our tasks or actions is being able to move tasks into, a high priority category, or in GTD, it's referred to up next category, and really defining the next best action for that project. A lot of times when we get to that point where a project becomes overwhelming or we're not quite sure where to start, a lot of that can move back into this question of what is the one highest priority next action to focus on next, and really using that as a model for maybe little by little making progress along projects and multiple projects, whether they're personal, professional, or otherwise. And we're going to look at this in the exercise in a little bit, in terms of starting with a list of projects and looking at a list of tasks that you might complete within that project. And lastly, deciding what is the next best action to take for that project. And these are the 3 steps that we want to take when we embark on a new project. There's the planning phase. We've identified that this project would help us get closer to our goals or achieve our goals. And we have a specific outcome associated with that project, and we'll look at a few examples. We're in the making phase, meaning you're in the project, it's active, you're making your way through this set of tasks, maybe identifying new tasks that you hadn't thought of prior. But this is really the making phase, where you're getting it done and making your way toward that goal. And lastly, this is a step that often maybe gets sidelined a little bit, but I think is as, if not more important than the first 2, is taking the time to reflect, whether it's on a monthly scale, quarterly, or annually, in terms of what were the projects that you set out to achieve, and what were some takeaways from each of those projects. And when we do that, the value of tracking these projects in a tool like Notion becomes really apparent, because we can see, well, here were all of my wins with my professional projects, and here were some challenges that I faced. And you start to see some common threads, some trends, and really gives insight, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, that can feed into future projects, and you're taking that intelligence with you going forward. So we'll also take a look at what that might look like, in this quick exercise. And okay, so we're going to jump into this template, and what I'll do is I will share the link to the template in the chat. So once you open that up, if you just duplicate it, you'll have one, in your workspace. If you have Notion open, if you don't, you can definitely just follow along. And I'll also share this link with everybody in the follow-up email as well. And from here, when we're transitioning, any questions that we have, or, specific challenges that you've been having, if you want to throw those in the chat, we'll definitely focus on addressing those at the very end. Okay, so this template we'll go through together, and the link in the chat is available to duplicate if you want to do the steps along at the same time. This is a Relatively straightforward exercise in a Notion page that goes through these three phases of planning, making, and reflecting, and taking a look at how we might go from starting with a simple list of projects and tasks and making our way through to using things like databases, relating databases together, and also seeing completed projects in the same space to be able to reflect and use moving forward. So, and we're sort of moving our way through the page, working our way down. So everything's kind of set up in that order. And if you do end up downloading it, there's a few quick notes here on instructions on, what to do and how to go through each step. But the first step with planning, if we use this toggle, toggles are super helpful, especially if you're taking notes or reviewing books or articles and want to focus in on a particular area without scrolling through a lot of content. Toggles can be a kind of easy way to filter out certain things. But this first part is really just listing out projects and to be able to move into our project database. So we'll look at a couple examples here. So if we have, say we want to launch an online course, and probably speaking a little autobiographically here, but plan a family summer trip, say road trip. And the third one, work on computer science teaching certification. So we have a combination of projects from, personal projects to professional and everything in between. And we're going to use these as examples for jumping into one, seeing what that page might look like and how we can look at tasks in an automatically filtered way so that we could use the benefits of the database, specifically being able to filter views and only see the things that we need at any given time. So if we expand this section, we have a look at a database, and if you see this arrow, that means that it's referencing an original database somewhere else in the page. So this is something that I do and I've seen done quite a bit, where to maintain kind of a clean and organized workspace, like digital workspace, having all of the databases in their own section that are the originals and referring back to them or linking to them in different places. In the project view, for instance, we'll see a linked task view. And then also if you use the Manifest Beta or Manifest OS, it's organized in a very similar way, where all of the original databases are organized into what we call mindsets, so that we know that all of the data is almost kind of stored there and is safe, even though you're linking to it in several different pages. So, and to, just to kind of quickly recap how to do that, if we do that / and then linked database, you'll be able to pull up, if we search the term projects, you'll be able to search for this particular page to connect. So I believe it's this one. I have way too many pages in here. So, so that's how you link a database, just really briefly. But the really fun part about this is going from a list to a table is one step. And in this case, we can highlight these projects and drag and drop them into our database here. And even though this is a linked view, anything that we add or edit in a linked database applies to the original. So it's meant to be a visible and show you information and be able to hide properties or kind of customize how you're seeing it. But that's one added benefit of using this. So now we have our 1.0 of a projects database that took just a few steps. And if we open this up so we can get a better look at what's in here, there's a few example properties that you may want to track for projects. Some people just want to focus on perhaps a due date or what is the goal for this project. And this is a very personal part of project management. What are the pieces of information that are most important for you to track and for you to look back on and learn from going forward? So these are a few examples of what this looks like. If we have a due date, we can say June 30th. Again, we have a priority. This is an example. Let's say it's medium priority. If it's not started, we also have a few examples. We can say that that's active if we just started it. And desired outcome. Just fill this in here. And creating a goal that's specific. And then wins and challenges. This is more for when you complete the project and you're closing it out, maybe going back and organizing any files, making sure that, everything is accessible in the future. Identifying at least one win, one thing that went really well with that project, and then maybe one challenge that you can look back on and maybe focus on that thing moving forward. For example, with YouTube, working on transitions and really working on the audio visual effects of YouTube that seem a little bit daunting and take some time to kind of practice. That would be one example of a challenge, that we would put here. And in this exercise template, there's also a template page here just to show what it might look like to save a few steps. And you can quickly create a new project. If you have an idea, use that template button. And really, template buttons are if you have projects that repeat, that are very similar in nature. If you're in graphic design and you find yourself creating the same type of imagery, or maybe it has the same dimensions or the same rules, or if you're doing projects with a particular client, template buttons are a great way to set up what you would need in that view so that you don't have to recreate all of these items and you don't have to link databases every time you start a new project. That could get very daunting. I learned that the hard way, doing these things manually before just kind of searching for ways to automate that process. But this template button just has a few things here that may be useful for tracking projects. The first one being tasks. So same example here, we would write out some tasks that we would use for this project. So for example, research on issues course creators have. I won't do too many just to keep up with time. We can say maybe launch beta course and get feedback from at least 5 people. And one thing that, if we set up a template, so in this template button, we have a board toggle, and I've added a few to-dos here, specifically filtering to the current project. So that is something that we'd have to do manually. So if we go to filter and search for the particular project, we'd select launch an online course. And now we see only tasks that are associated with this project. So this is for the use case of you've set aside 2 hours to work on a project, you open up this project page, we make it full screen and we have everything that we need for this project. specifically tasks, but also if you relate a documents database or if you relate a research database, those things could be linked and filtered the same way we did with tasks, so that you're really looking at specific content, even though these databases are really encompassing all of your work, all of your pages and documents, maybe from different areas. So same thing we did earlier with projects, we would drag these into Inbox. And from here, we can kind of filter and customize how we want this board to look. You know, it's a default in a Kanban view, but if you prefer to have a table, let's say, they can show up as a table, but you do have to kind of do that filtering one more time. So if you duplicated that Notion page that we put in the chat, starting with just listing out projects could be helpful to, you know, find things that maybe you didn't consider a project, or things that maybe have lingered for months or quarters and you want to set a due date for. But starting with a list, and the same thing goes for starting with pen and paper, as a means to move into putting it into a table and being able to relate these pieces of information with each other. So if we go back into projects and into this homepage, let's close these so that they're out of the way. So just to recap, you know, we did a list of projects and we moved them into our database and looked at that launching an online course example and added a few tasks in there. So the next step is, in terms of making, what I've seen is that there tends to be two styles of project management. One is you go into the project view and everything's in there. And the other is you see tasks and you see what is up next for perhaps several projects at the same time. So if you have maybe short bits of time and you want to jump into the up next category, you can see what is the next most important step for each of my active projects to be able to quickly jump in and see. So in this example, we have two views. One is for active tasks and one is for up next. And to give some context as to what we're looking at, these two, and we know by that kind of like little arrow icon, that these are again linked to this original database at the bottom. So this is that original tasks database that has all of our active tasks. And in here we have two views. So we can quickly open up and see what are the active tasks that I need to complete that I've started and, you know, don't have any blockers or don't have anything holding them back from being completed. And what tasks are up next across different projects. So these are not associated to projects, just as an example of what this view might look like. But this part is, in my opinion, the most important part of project management in terms of if we get stuck on a project, or if we are not sure what the next step is, or it just feels like a very daunting next step, starting with how can I compartmentalize these tasks into, you know, work that is more achievable in a shorter time span, and what is the most important next task for that project. And I like to limit it to one or two tasks in the up next status to make sure that if you've set up a project, you've made a list of tasks that you need to complete, you've set up that system and it will work if we're sticking to that, moving one or two up next tasks at a time. And, you know, if as we're going through and making progress along projects, it is definitely less stressful and less overwhelming if we maybe have several projects active at the same time. If you're planning a trip, working on an independent creative project and tracking, professional work, um, feels less daunting when we see, a small list of up next tasks without seeing kind of the whole roadmap, which could get overwhelming. So this, in my view, is an incredibly powerful strategy to consistently make, incremental progress across multiple projects. And if we get into this last part, the reflection, this may look a little unfinished because we added that list, and technically there are projects that are not completed yet. But there's two key views here that could be useful when you've completed that project and you get to the end of the quarter or end of the month, and you want to just kind of quickly reflect on the things that you worked on, the things that you completed. Did things run, over your target schedule? And if so, what are some changes and pivots that could be made to continue making progress? Those things are going to happen, as we're never going to predict with 100% certainty all of the tasks that are needed to complete a project. But if we create a system that works, for you personally, it's a system that is kind of being built on project after project. So after every project kind of gets a little bit more intelligent and start to see trends that could be more actionable. And if we see these, again, these are linked to that original database. And we have a few properties that are visible to get a better sense of what they look like. This is supposed to be calendar. Not sure why that didn't. So the two views, if this is the table view, then I just kind of added a calendar view, but that was a little bit of a bug there. But for example, if we take a look at this table and we expand it a little bit, we can start to see a few properties that are definitely helpful to see in relation to each other. Specifically, what were the desired outcomes for each project? Same thing, what were some challenges and some wins? And, reviewing these at a regular cadence is not necessarily going to formally reflect in your future projects, but it's insights that are processed in your mind and are being reflected in the decisions that we make in terms of what projects we decide to pursue and how we pursue those projects, and what tasks we prioritize within each project. And that's it for that exercise. One thing I would recommend is, if you do have an existing project management system, actually it's a good time for a poll, because I do want to get some information from you. And this is an anonymous poll, so it's just more of like seeing where the group is at in terms of these two questions. But number one, how do you currently manage projects? And two, when it comes to productivity in general, what are some of the things that we're feeling, whether or not, we're in Notion or another tool. One, side note too, I'm a huge fan of Notion, but probably 80 or 90% of the time, ideas for projects or tasks start on pen and paper. Sometimes they start in, the Notes app. Sometimes I use reminders. So Notion for me is if I'm adding information into my workspace, I know that it's there for a reason. It's tied to a particular project or a particular area. And that also makes it easier to kind of clean up if you're cleaning up your workspace, like weekly or monthly, and making sure that all the things in there are of value and are things that you'd want to refer back to later. But nice to see that variety. And then with the second question, yes. So I will agree 100% with the feeling of being overwhelmed, especially with a tool like Notion. The positive is that it's super customizable. The downside is that it's so open-ended that it could take some time to really identify what is the workspace that is best suited to you, which is also why I suggest really starting out with a sketch of some people are trying to track habits, on a daily basis. Some people are, specifically just trying to manage projects that are not so much interested in, using Notion to create a vision or a mission statement. And a lot of us are trying to figure out, interesting or insightful ways to relate these different areas of our lives so that information is visible when it makes sense. But it is a very iterative process. And that's also one thing I found to be a challenge with creating templates is you spend a lot of time building out a workspace that is optimized for how you work, and kind of put it out there, and there's new questions that arise from the reality that we all work in slightly different ways, and it's really about finding models that most closely reflect how we operate. And that's one of the big reasons why with the Manifest Productivity website, it's trying to zoom out a little bit from templates to be able to present various mental models, just acknowledging that everybody's coming in with different priorities and different things that they're trying to work on and build on. So really trying to present different models. What are some benefits of trying to apply them? What are some things to consider? And maybe some challenges with incorporating a new model. And one thing I'd like to, throw out there in terms of if we were in a class and I was giving homework, I tend to not give homework, but in this case, may be helpful. This is a set of steps that, whether you have a system in place or you're just trying to set it up for the first time, some steps to consider leading up to creating a workspace that is tracking projects and associated tasks. So what the steps that we took together, trying to do those and really spending a little bit more time. I know taking 15 minutes, I'm sure there's projects that maybe we forgot about or didn't catch in that list, but really identifying what are projects that we're not formally tracking currently that have more than one task associated with that project, listing it out, and either using that Notion page that was shared, or if you do want to create it from scratch. And also, very important one, what is the desired outcome for that project? Often, if we have a project that is several weeks in duration or longer, it's very common to kind of forget what the target was with that project and how it fits into our larger system or larger set of goals. So it's really the desired outcomes works as a reminder to really keep centered on why we started that project in the first place. And once we do that, it becomes a lot more manageable to zoom into that project, list out tasks, as detailed as possible, to be able to pretty much have a roadmap for each project and work your way through, whether you use that Kanban view or if you prefer the table view. I think there's 6 different views for each database. So you can look at a timeline, look at a calendar, and that's a perfect example of addressing the different ways and styles in which we work and visualize information. And then lastly, moving those highest priority tasks, 1 or 2 at a time, as a strategy to prevent that stress creeping in and that feeling of getting overwhelmed and shutting off. I've definitely felt that quite a bit. Still go through that at times, but I do feel like they're less common, just from iterating on that manifest workspace and editing out all of the properties that I wasn't really tracking and wasn't really looking at or gaining value from, and really just being left with only the information that is of value and is insightful. So um, kind of the homework assignment I leave you all with, and hopefully that Notion template is helpful. And considering we're at the end of April, it's also a good opportunity to reflect on the previous month, what projects are carrying over into the new month, and I do plan on reaching out to everybody who RSVP'd a month from now, just to see, if this was helpful, and offer up, any help or tips to, um, work and improve on our workspaces. It is a very iterative process, and can get frustrating at times, especially at the beginning. So reducing complexity at the early end and adding things and properties incrementally, and also kind of housekeeping every now and then to make sure that the things you're tracking are still of value. And then one quote, just to kind of recenter, before we open it up for questions, if we have any, is this quote from Seth Godin on his last book. But really focusing on building our workspace as a practice and as a means to, make incremental gains and improvements on how we're working, and ensuring that the time and energy that we are investing in projects, whether they're personal or professional, that time and energy are going the um, to the work that is most meaningful to you personally. So, and that practice is something that is 100% within our control, and it's probably the thing that I've found most exciting about Notion is the incremental gains in terms of not being too great at tracking daily habits yet, but feeling a lot better about managing projects and having a system where it feels like second nature. And Notion, or a tool that you use, does start to work like that digital brain or extended mind or digital memory, whatever we want to call it, that we get that benefit from having our piece of software act as a storage of knowledge, of information, and of systems that really help us do the things that we're trying to do, and do them with less stress and more intention. One last thing I will leave you with is just taking a quick look at the manifest system, like what that looks like. I know some of us are already using it, but it's essentially a workspace to combine a few different things. So it's really influenced by a combination of resources like Getting Things Done, the 12-week year, Atomic Habits, and Tiago Forte's The Para Method. But it's basically organized into 4 or 5 different spaces. So the Now space has databases for tracking. If I want to track certain habits daily, there are some properties that are preset in the template, that, in my view, the daily habit tracking is both the hardest, but also the most insightful. So definitely a challenge to get up and running there. And also spaces for tasks and projects, very similar to what we looked at in the example. And lastly, the mindset. So this is what we mentioned earlier in terms of organizing those original databases in that singular space, and also having pages for a wide range of actions that the majority of us could benefit from in terms of setting our long-term vision, annual goals, quarterly objectives. So these also are pre-filled with kind of questions to reflect into that are part, what are the aspirations, what are goals, whether they're personal, relationship, friendship, professional. And the mindsets also are related to each other when it makes sense. So, the planning mindset, these areas, projects, and tasks are all interconnected. And if we're tracking, how we're making progress along things that we're reading or projects that we're executing, are all connected via those 4 key timeframes. So that's and also just kind of speaking with users, because this launched, I think, a little less than a month ago. A lot of the common threads were that there were very different focuses in terms of some people that are trying to manage different projects. That seemed to be the most common one, but also really highlighted that we all have very particular working styles and priorities for what we're trying to get done and how we're trying to get it done. So that's been a very insightful part of this process, which is why, I'm very excited to really kind of identify different and maybe complementary models that could be most helpful depending on your particular workflow. So, that's just kind of a peek into the future of manifest productivity. And again, the website's going to kind of be the home base for these resources, whether they're YouTube videos or also bringing in templates from other people that, I've connected with and people have recommended to, also kind of highlight innovations that are happening, elsewhere, which there's a ton that's happening. So on that note, just want to leave it open one more time if there are any questions. And if we do have questions come up, whether they're project management oriented or otherwise, definitely feel free to email that email address. It's manifestproductivity@gmail.com. I will definitely get back to you, just as a thank you for being here and being present and being patient with these technical issues. So on that note, I hope that was helpful. And if you want to stay in touch with what is happening with Manifest Productivity, we have a newsletter on Substack. I know a few of you, I recognize some names in terms of people who are already subscribed. But that's kind of where a lot of the updates are shared in terms of links, both to Manifest or to other resources that could be helpful just getting up and running and finding new strategies to consider with building out our minimalist productivity systems. So I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, depending on where you're at, and hope to keep in touch with all of you.